Hello, staff. It's Chris. This screencast will be an overview of our instructional priorities for the week of April 20th through 24th. Before we dive in, I just want to say thank you for all of your hard work for our students and for our community over these last few weeks as we've transitioned to online learning. We've already come a long way in this work. Our first week back into online learning was really about providing access for teachers and for students to make sure they had everything they needed to be online and to be learners in that space. And we also wanted to prioritize touching base with every student just to see where they were as people and what their families needed. Last week, our big focus was on our big focus area was on our SPED students, making sure that they had the clear instructions necessary, modifications provided, and interventions in place to support the content and digital learning spaces, as well as the models for what success looks like at the end of each week. This week, we will forefront our English language learners, knowing that the digital learning space is even more complex when navigating online learning and language development. And we'll put together a few things to think about as we prioritize those students. I'll talk about our backwards planning document for the rest of May, and also just touch on grading and the philosophy around grading at Manual over the last month of school. I reached out to Evelyn this week just to ask her opinion and to seek her expertise on how we support our language learners in digital learning spaces. The first sentence of what she wrote I thought was so profound and powerful, just for us to remember that language learners rely on context to create meaning. If there's not that context surrounding the visuals, the clear instructions, the places where comprehension and input are make sense to them, then that learning is even more challenging. So the 5 steps below, or 5 considerations, are things to think about when you're putting together your lessons for next week. The first one is what we talked about with our SPED students and for all students. It's just clear, precise, and concise instructions. How can you both provide written instructions that are supported with audio or video recordings of how to go through the task and the learning for the week? The second consideration to think about is how you can make the learning more visual. The more photos and visual supports, the more graphics, the more places that students can see to build context or see to understand where they need to go, the better. The third piece for language learners is one that we all really dive into a lot, but something that we cannot miss in a digital learning space is language supports. What are the word banks that we're including? What language needs to be used in the task during the process of completion? What sentence or paragraph frames do you have for students to use or rely on when they're writing pieces for your class? And what are other ways that you can help them make meaning through visual supports? The fourth piece we talked a bit about last week with our SPED students, but it's really about chunking. How do we make each step clear and precise for students to access, complete, in order to move on to the next? Instead of providing a large, do all of this now and turn it in by Friday, step-by-step instructions. If we revisit last week's screencast, there's some great examples on how teachers are chunking their learning for the day and for the week to make that input comprehensible for students. And the fifth piece, the fifth consideration, is just making sure that we include as many home language resources as possible. We have staff who can help with translation, who can help with finding first language resources for students. And remember, Denver Public Schools still has translation services that can be accessed at this time to provide students with language resources to access their learning each week. Our in-house support for these processes for both our English language learners and our SPED students will take place with Rosie and Evelyn on Fridays. So directly after our online staff meeting, Rosie and Evelyn will be available via Zoom to support with any SPED or ELD modifications that you so desire or need. They can support teachers to modify assignments, to create models, to build scaffolds, or to think through language supports. When you get this PowerPoint, you'll have this link that's actually live to the Zoom meeting, and the password is included. But that'll take place on Fridays directly after the staff meeting, and we'll make sure that you have the link to that meeting and the password available so you can get support from Rosie and Evelyn in building those supports for our SPED and ELD students. Another piece to think about, and one deliverable for the end of next week, is just a week-by-week breakdown of what's happening in your online space. At the end of this presentation is a link that's called the End of Year Task Overview. And this is just what's happening each week in your class and how is that being planned backwards from May 22nd. These overviews should not be long. I've provided a model here. You can see that for me, again, going back to this one pager and a progression through US history, the task for next week would be a one pager comparing and contrasting the causes of the Korean War with the causes of the Vietnam War. Students will read 2 articles, watch a short film, and complete a discussion post before submitting the one pager. That's all that needs to be included in this task overview from week to week. But the ILT coaches, administrators are asking that you have those tasks outlined for the end of April all the way through the end of May, just so we have an idea of what your backwards plan is from that point. One other thing to keep in mind as we give more information about grading next week, it'll be very important to have each of these tasks outlined so you know what grading may look like from week to week to week throughout the end of the year. So this serves two different purposes. One is to provide ILT with an idea of what's taking place in each class, and 2, supporting teachers in identifying what will be graded for the rest of the semester. Just a note on grading. This has been a huge lift for the administrative team and the instructional leadership team. But I wanted to forefront really the philosophy behind what you'll see early next week. These certainly are unprecedented times, and they're difficult for many, if not all of us. And we wanted to communicate to teachers and staff that more than anything, our grading is asset-based. We know that our kids want to learn, they want to engage and participate, and that there are extenuating circumstances that may keep them from that. We do not want to default to our kids won't or can't. More importantly, that our kids can and will when they have that space to do so. And so know that our grading policy that will be outlined next week is asset-based. It's evolving. There's been input from ILT, from teachers, from the central leadership team from Denver Public Schools on the plan that will be shown next week. It's responsive to the needs of our students, knowing that these are unprecedented times and old systems of grading and the way we think about grading have to shift on the fly. And it's personalized. We really will pursue grading each student on a personalized level. We'll create guidelines and an overview, but this really will necessitate looking at each student as an individual and their work both before and during online learning. Some things to think about this week as you dive into coursework on April 20th are these buckets of learners. We're going to separate academic production from engagement. Engagement is our social emotional piece. How many students are accessing instruction and or some of our other supports like the Light Center, our food pantry, our student support staff. How are they engaging in those is one thing that we're thinking about. In terms of instruction, we're talking about academic production. How much are students engaging in academic work that's outlined for them in each course? For this upcoming week, focus in on these 3 buckets. Which students are showing limited academic production? Students who are showing no coursework, potentially not logging on, or turning in less than 40% of the tasks. At this point, you might have 2 to 3 tasks. These might be students who have submitted one thing, one item, one task over the last couple of weeks. Which students are showing moderate academic production? Students who are logging in but are inconsistently attempting coursework. They might have turned in 2 tasks but are missing another. And which students are showing continuous academic production? Students who are consistently logging in, communicating with you as the teacher and have submitted all of their assignments or are working on submitting all of their assignments and you're aware of their progress. Having an idea of those 3 buckets of students will help a lot when the rest of the grading plan is unveiled early next week. I wanted to give these core beliefs about grading, as well as some of the common language, as a framework and a foundation for what will come out early next week from the administrative team and ILT around what grading looks like specifically. And lastly, just resources for you as teachers. As I mentioned earlier, that end of year task overview form is linked here. It'll be in the document and also in the email. That's due on Friday, April 24th. I'll make sure to send out a calendar invite to remind you of that due date. Please reach out to me if you have any questions about that document or to your instructional coach. Online course codes are available for you if you're looking to log into other classes. Our digital learning and meeting schedule is still available. Thank you for those who have added to the Padlet, who are adding ideas about how to make digital learning more engaging. And then our remote learning office hours schedule is linked here as well. Don't forget the supports from Rosie and Evelyn. We'll consistently send out reminders for those of you who are looking at how to build better supports for students, either our language learners, our special ed students, or really all students. Again, knowing that practice is best practice for all. Again, thank you. Thank you for your dedication. Thank you for your hard work. I know we all miss each other. It's hard to do this in isolation from one another, but the fact that we're making it happen for students in our community speaks to our level of professionalism and dedication and passion for this work. Much love to you all and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.